Oh, shit. Okay, I'm gonna try this again. I fell off the ladder. It's early still. Alright, this Carpo here, it's Monday, early obviously. I just fell off the ladder, so I'm gonna redo this. For those who watch my videos, I've got some random videos I posted recently about these lectures that I've been listening to, these theology lectures and ideas behind it. They're basically philosophy lectures, but they entail a whole wide variety of subjects. Everything from what's the meaning of life to how did religions come to where they are to, you know, which societies rose and fell and why, and all this fascinating stuff. And there's probably about 60, 70 lectures in there, and each one's, you know, 20, 30 hours long, so it's a lot of stuff to go through. And I just download them onto my phone and then put them on my headphones and listen to them at work. Well, this one comes on the other day, and the guy who was doing the lecture, he starts off talking about the vision, and the title of the series was about perceptions. And I was under the impression that they were going to start talking about the way that we perceive the world and how we can be mistaken or correct, and perceptions based on experience or subjectivity. But it turns out it's actually about the functionality of our sensory organs. And I just finished the first couple lectures, and they were about vision. And I kept waiting for him to get into something about the way we see things and how we're fooled, but he didn't. He's straight up outlining the exact way that the eyeball works, how the lenses work. He goes into every type of eye ailment you can have, you know, cataracts, all the surgeries, all the different things that they do. And then I got into the second lecture, and now he's talking about hearing and the cochlea and all these different parts of the ear that help our ear function and how they work. And these components that are wound up like guitar strings, and the cilia, these little hairs that are moved around, and how they, you know, wave the eardrum in order to produce sound. I understand now why this lecture doesn't get into the philosophical side of this, because what they're doing is laying out a foundation for people to understand your own sensory organs, so you can see how you can be fooled and figure that out on your own, but also see how you can trust your senses, if you can trust your senses. So what I wanted to say was this one part it got me thinking about what sound is. They basically this is funny, I don't know who volunteered for this or how they got them to do it, but years ago, I don't know if it was decades or a century ago or what, a doctor convinced a man to allow him to glue a wooden, I guess it would be just a wooden stick of some sort, you know, like a stir stick, some sort of device that he glued onto the man's eardrum. I don't know what he used, I don't know the details. He glued this onto the man's eardrum, right? And then hooked it up to a machine that vibrated that stick at a very fast level. And the man perceived the vibration as sound. Now, those who know sound know that this is obvious. This is something, yeah, of course he would. You know, the eardrum, you know, receives the information and turns it into electrical impulses, and the brain receives it as sound. But the implications of that, I mean, if you really think about it, let me start with saying this old saying that I used to hate it, now I love it. It's if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, does it really make a sound? And through the years I thought, why would a person say something so silly? I mean, yeah, of course it makes a sound. We know that it creates the disturbance of air, regardless of whether people are there or not. Only if you understand the depth of sound can you understand what the meaning of that saying really is. Understand that sound actually is an electrical impulse, an interpretation of what's going on around us. For example, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's there to hear it, sure, it still makes a concussion, but the sound is perceived by the human. Now, if a fish was laying next to the river, or if a fish was swimming in the river and a tree fell next to the river, would he hear that sound? Sure, he would hear the impulses through the water. But would it be the same sound? No, of course not, because fish have different hearing, different sensory organs. It might not even be a sound. It might be a vibration. I don't know how fish hear. But a different animal may hear very similarly, yet maybe they might hear more of the high-pitched whine of the tree. Maybe another animal may hear the vibrations more. And this is very important to remember, that humans, while we all have the same hearing capacity to an extent, we can never know for sure what another person's hearing. And since the ear is such a sensitive organ, it's very easy to get, well, I think what they call it is synesthesia, which is where your senses get messed up and you start to hear colors, see sounds, that kind of stuff. LSD causes synesthesia, but the human mind can also produce its own endogenous chemicals like DMT, which may very well cause the same sort of audio-visual hallucinations. This is why I don't believe people when they tell me that they've talked to God or talked to Jesus, because I'm at the mercy of their individual interpretation of what talking or hearing or understanding really is. The hearing part in itself is pretty amazing, but the visual part is really what got me. And of course we're going to get into scent, smelling and touch and all that and later in the lectures, but right now they're just talking about those two. And the sight thing was really amazing. Astronomers learned long ago that if you want to watch an astronomical event, you offset the telescope a slight bit from what you're observing, and you offset your vision a little bit from what you're observing, because your peripheral vision picks up much more than your actual vision. We have a blind spot directly ahead of us wherever we're looking. It doesn't appear to be a blind spot, but it is. And the way the rods and the cones work inside the eye is quite amazing, but the rods and the cones are for separate uses. Like, I'm not an expert on this. I'm trying to remember which one's which. I believe that the rods are for helping us see in normal light, perhaps, and the cones are for seeing in dimmer light, or vice versa. I'm not sure, but the point being that the eyeball is at the mercy of not only the world around it, but the interpretation of the individual. If you see something and you think you see something, you're bound to question yourself to an extent. Some people don't question themselves. They think they saw something and they saw it. Seeing something out of the corner of your eye is a perfect example. There are many different things that happen to the human brain during visual stimulus. Sometimes light can go into the eye and then bounce around, and I can't remember exactly what happens, but it's not able to escape quite right, and it ends up refracting back off of the cones, and it shows up as something out of the corner of your vision. And I'm one to try to be reasonable with my own senses. I don't like to try to pretend like I saw something so it must be true, or I heard something it must be true. But if you don't trust your own senses, well, what can you trust, really? And I think this is why I find it so fascinating to learn about these things, because I have to understand how our sensory organs work to understand how we perceive the world in order to understand if my perceptions are flawed or not. And I know many of my perceptions probably are flawed. In fact, I think all of our perceptions are flawed, and I think that's what makes us human, but also that's what makes life interesting. In other words, if your senses always told you exactly what was going on, what would be the fun of that? There has to be this question, this what if. But I am thoroughly impressed by the sensory organs. And I know they've just talked about hearing and smell hearing and sight right now. But once they get into smell, that's when I'm really going to be fascinated, because I know the olfactory senses are the most